would like to welcome, first of all, our guest, the guest of our panel, Barbara Braams, Professor Barbara Braams from Vrije University, Professor Gielen from NWO, Professor Karel Luyben, National Open Science Coordinator, very nice, and my colleague Nick Fowler. All of them will be properly introduced by Charly, the moderator, in a few minutes. I heard you are informal, you are relaxed, and you are witty. Good. That sounds very promising. Welcome to many international guests, which is amazing, all the way from Beijing. Anyhow. Welcome to many researchers, some of our editors, students, actually from different countries, and also, of course, from the Netherlands. Welcome also to many of my colleagues. Great, I will mention you a little bit further. This is a welcome to the Elsevier Open Access event, and we celebrate the International Open Access Week. We have designed this open house to show actually that we are open and constructive partners in open access and open science for that matter. We welcome discussion today. We welcome debate. We welcome criticism. Well, criticism, yes, we do. We hope that the day will provide new perspective of actually what we do. Please judge us on what we do and what we stand for and what we believe in. That may be important. So welcome to our open house. And we happen here to be in the Amsterdam Elsevier office. This is a place actually which is fully connected with over 60 other Elsevier offices. Each of them are connected with communities, international communities, and global communities of people. Think of nurses, think of chemists, think of climate experts or cardiologists, think of civil engineers or molecular biologists, food security specialists, geologists, etc., etc. In Europe, in Asia, in Australia, in the Americas and Africa. This is a place also where hundreds of our own Elsevier colleagues are former scientists, and they are passionate about what they do. They feel connected to the science and medicine through their own roles, to the roles of their colleagues and their mission, sometimes their friends or family who are also researchers. So, dear audience and dear panel members, this is also the place where we think and act about which sort of content, which type of tools, which platform functionality, which metrics, which technology can deeply help research and medicine. This is the place where we think and act how we can serve science through all stages of the research life cycle. And from the perspective not only from the researcher, but also from the perspective of, let's say, the institute, the university, or the funder. This is the place where we secure our content to be as reliable as possible by ensuring independency of our editors, a big value, by mediating in conflicts around attribution, by defying sometimes political pressure, by making so-called conflict of interest transparent, and finally by making our best efforts to fight plagiarism, image manipulation, or citation pushing. This is the place where we secure our content to be as relevant as possible by extended governance on peer review, ensuring feedback is given to research methodology, proper data documentation, and interpretation of results. That is what peer review is about. This is also a place which is, and it's riddling with technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science. This is the place where we have grown from a legacy of just publishing trusted content to a wider role stretching outside the publishing cycle, outside just written research articles, and outside offering content just passively. Growing from a certain legacy, we made first steps in providing now information from any trusted source or publisher, not just Elsevier articles. Open science, I think that is. We advanced assisting in the speed of science by a very active role in, for instance, digital commons and preprints. We offer solutions for hosting, searching and sharing of original research data and make progress in creating individualized recommendations for suggested further reading. Just to mention a few things. We made progress in providing tools and metrics that help in assessing the impact of research beyond just downloads or citations. Think of its impact to media, to patents, to industry collaboration, etc. This is one of the places where we are celebrating the Open Access Week. Let's stop here for a second. One could hear peculiar things in the cross-section of Elsevier and open access. Open access, isn't Elsevier a little bit against it? Isn't Elsevier actually obstructing it? Doesn't Elsevier just stick to the subscription model? Is the subscription model actually immoral? Everyone has every right to think and say so. For now, for those who have doubts how we think about open access or act about open access, I offer the observation that we are one of the fast-growing open access publishers. We are adding some 60 new titles, 60 new gold open access titles between now and December. Some further 100 new open access, gold open access titles in 2019. Open access minded researchers recognize our open access mission increasingly. The growth of submissions to our open access journals now exceeds 50%, 50. We are recruiting over 200 new colleagues in open access between this year and 2021, and we invest over, let's put it, a handful of tens of millions in open access during this period. More in general, our program of open access title is based on the same extended governance of research integrity and governance of research relevance as the rest of our journal program. This is the place where I'm not portraying that open access is the solution for all challenges in research. Challenges such as information overload, challenges as lack of discoverability, challenges as lack of research funding, and many more. For now, also, open access is not the preferred access solution for all policy makers everywhere in the world equally. This results in a dual reality, and that is creating a degree of complexity. However, where open access is in demand, we are keen to meet that demand and exceed it, exceed the expectations to serve that demand. In that sense, I see open access as an unmissable element for a wider mission to serve research in science and medicine, of open science in general. And this is a mission we feel deeply, deeply committed to. Finally, this is also the place, and all other Elsevier places, where our house is open to our guests and to the media, also after this week, after today. Dear panel members, dear audience, have a great discussion with the aim to understand each other and maybe to do things together. And to all our guests, I say that also after the panel session, you may find time to speak to our colleagues in the audience here and to the other forums. I warmly recommend them to you. Also, they will say, welcome to this place. Before I pass the microphone to Charlotte, our moderator, the applause is for you and the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe, for your very kind words. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Geerdink. I'm a moderator within my own company, Charly Speaks, and it is a great pleasure to be moderating this open house event on open access. I'd like to start with a couple of practicalities first. First of all, you're more than welcome to engage with us online via Twitter, and we have the hashtag OAWeek available for you. Secondly, we do like you to switch your phones onto silent mode. And let's make an agreement here. I've heard there's no sponsor yet for the refreshments afterwards. So, if your mobile phone rings, you'll take care of the refreshments. Do we have an agreement on that? Okay. No? Oh. Let's try. Okay, also good to mention to you is that pictures will be taken during this event, there will be filming, and also there will be some reporters in the crowd. And finally, you're also more than welcome to engage yourselves in the discussion. There will be ample of opportunity to seek the interaction with the panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, why are we here today? The event is organized in the framework of the Open Access Week, taking place from the 22nd until the 28th of October. And the event will provide the opportunity for funders, institutions, policymakers and publishers alike, while developing and implementing open access policy, to discuss how we can reach consensus globally on the best way forward. Is consensus actually needed? Is it desired? Yes or no? What might be the advantages or disadvantages of harmonization? How can all stakeholders work together to reach their goals? So this is what we're going to discuss during a panel about how we can harmonize open access policies. And therefore it is a great pleasure to ask 4 people to step forward to join me in the panel discussion. Ladies first. So Barbara Braams, more than welcome to step forward. And it's actually Professor Dr. Barbara Braams from the Department of Clinical, Neuro and Developmental Psychology from the Vrije Universiteit, Amsterdam. Great to have you. The second speaker I'd like to introduce to you is Professor Stan Gielen, and he's the president of the Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research, or also known as NWO. The third speaker, Professor Karel Luyben, who is the National Coordinator Open Science in the Netherlands. Also great to have you. Yeah, very important, thank you. And then finally, it is my great pleasure to welcome our in-house guest, and that is Dr. Nick Fowler, the Chief Academic Officer of Elsevier. Okay, thank you so much for joining us in this panel. And I think it would be a good idea to first start with Nick, for the simple reason you are our host. And I think Philippe already pointed out there's a lot of discussion nowadays, well actually for many, many years going on open access. There's criticism, but there's also a lot of praisal. So my question to you is, can you share with us how the debate on open access has started within Elsevier and what the impact has been on your products and services?
Thank you. Certainly. So, by way of background, I've been with Elsevier for 15 years now. For all 15 of those years, we've been working on and talking about open access. I think it's very fair to say that as a company that sees itself having a real responsibility for the quality of research information and how researchers are served, we were very conservative in the early days, and that has continued to, I think, shroud our, the perception of our approach towards open access. But nevertheless, we have always supported open access, and I think the degree of confidence with which we've supported it has grown significantly, so that now we see it as a something that we fully embrace and want to enable to the full extent. In terms of how it's affected our business, the first thing I worked on was, back in 2003, was the manuscript posting policy. So we had a policy that enabled any researcher voluntarily to post their manuscript to their own website or their repository. It was applauded by Peter Suber from Harvard, who's one of the world's leading open access advocates, and he said nothing more is needed to achieve global open access than this. Of course, others had different points of view. In 2006, we had the Wellcome Trust policy. That was the first funder policy to provide money to make articles gold open access for researchers funded by the Wellcome Trust. We worked closely with the Wellcome Trust to enable that, and when researchers weren't compliant, we worked with them to increase compliance. And now we're at a point where every single one of our journals offers a green open access option, and almost every one of our journals offers a gold open access option. And as Philippe said, we have launched hundreds of pure gold open access journals, including mega journals. So I think we've come a very long way in 15 years, but ask me again 15 years from now, and I'm sure today I'll be reflecting that we could have moved faster.
Okay, thank you. So let's have a debate again then in 15 years. Looking forward to that. Okay, perhaps also I'd like to ask a question to Karel. You're the coordinator for open science in the Netherlands. What have your achievements been the past 1.5 years?
Well, first of all, it's been hard work. There's a lot of things to do in the domain of open science, which I tend to define as open access, fair data, and citizen science, in order to follow more or less the definition of Europe. What we've done is work with the steering committee on open access for the open science plan. I should say the steering committee for open science, sorry, on the open science plan, which was published at the beginning of last year. And we have added to that quite a bit of things in the meantime because the field is developing. And we're now working on a planning for the future with respect to what the steering group and the platform are going to do in the next step. And I can tell you later more about what we've done so far.
Okay, thank you very much. So what we're doing right now is to get a better feeling of how those people are involved in open access policies and development. Stan, may I ask you, some of the ongoing developments, recently Plan S was launched. Can you tell a little bit more about your involvement and why you are a supporter of this plan?
Yes, well, Plan S was launched because of the commitment that the European leaders and also the funding agencies in 2016 made to have 100% of the papers available open access. And the way we're proceeding now is there's no way we'll achieve that goal. So the idea was we really have to do something and make a clear step in order to ensure that we will reach that target. So I'm NWO, together supported by the VSNU and the Royal Academy of Arts and Sciences and also the Ministry of Education, Science and Education. We have signed plans and we are part of the coalition as to see whether we can really make progress and make a big step right now in order to achieve the goal to have all the papers that are the result of research that is done by public funding in order to make that open access available.
Okay, thank you. So that can be seen as a real vehicle for everything that you stand for at NWO.
Well, we do more than that for NWO, but it's definitely important.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we had some visions of the publishers, national coordinator, research funding organization, but of course researchers are key in this debate. So Barbara, can you share with us, I mean, you do a lot of research, like for example, why do adolescents drink so much alcohol or engage in risky driving behavior, and why they do this more often when their friends are around. And for that, you need to gather quite a lot of data. Can you tell me, is it easy to get access to information, to other publications and research data?
I mean, for me it's relatively easy, but also because, well, I work at the university, so the university has subscriptions. Sometimes I have trouble accessing papers. Most often there's a way around it, or researchers publish it on their own website. But yeah, there have been occasions where interesting and research that I would need wasn't accessible to me.
Okay, and that's problematic?
Yes. It means, well, I have a good position because I'm usually Dutch universities or other like large universities who have a lot of subscriptions. So for me, a lot of research is accessible. But if you're at a smaller university or don't have those subscriptions, then you're disadvantaged as a scientist. You need to build from other people's research, and you need to know what's out there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So you're basically saying perhaps we should also have a discussion about kind of new models. How can we ensure that all these data and publications are really widely available? And perhaps that's also a question to come back to Nick. You talked to us about the recent developments, well, from the past 15 years basically that you have been involved. What do you really see as the barriers to open access? And a question related to that, are the publishers to blame? Because there's a lot of discussion going on about that.
So I think we're fully supportive of open access. I really don't think there's anyone who would dispute the benefits of open access, whether that's in various different flavors. So of course, it's beneficial for everyone to be able to read the published outputs of publicly funded research. The question is not so much whether it's a good idea, but how actually to implement it. So I think the discussion has moved on a long way from where it was 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, where people were disputing is open access good or bad. We're far forward from that. We're now at the point, how do we actually enable it? Again, as I mentioned, every single journal that Elsevier publishes has a green open access option. Almost every journal has a gold open access option. So we often scratch our heads and say, what's the problem? Right.
So you would argue that there aren't any barriers?
There are barriers to adoption. So you, as you
So
said,
what are those barriers?
So I'm coming to that.
Yeah.
The,
Thank you.
so you ask yourself the question, if the possibility is 100% open access, why is gold open access only at 15? We look at ourselves and say, you're not buying what's there on offer. And so I think actually open access is something that all stakeholders in the research ecosystem have a role to play. So funders have a role to play by specifying what their policies are. NIH has a policy, as do all the larger US funding agencies, NSF, DOE, DOD, that says you must publish it, make the manuscript available after 12 months. So that covers a big portion of research. Plan S means that an increasing portion, probably around 6 to 8% by our estimate at the moment, will be made gold open access because the money is provided via the grants. So that's the role that funders can play. They can specify policies, they can provide funds. Then there's universities. So universities can also make policies, they can provide funds. And then you have the researchers, the mere 7 million researchers who don't like to be told what to do and don't like to be told where to publish. So they're also stakeholders in the system. So actually the answer is we all need to work together, and we are absolutely ready to play our part to help enable open access.
Okay, so you're basically saying it's a multi-actor approach to make open access a full reality, so to say. There's a lot of untapped potential.
That would be a shorter answer, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Stan, would you like to comment on that? Because you might have a different view as a research funding organization.
Well, I'd like to make a few comments. He said we're blaming the publishers. Well, I want to say I think that I never blamed anyone. I think the publishers and the funders each have their own role. What is, and I'm just speaking on behalf of many scientists and also many funders, there's some kind of a frustration in the sense that, well, let me go back to, before I took this position as president of the Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research, I was Dean of the Faculty of Science. And every 3 years there was a riot in front of my office. When we had the new big deals and the new, well, when they announced, the university announced that we had to pay more for the journals. And then I just said, well, ask my colleagues, my professors and my faculty, which subscription should we cancel, or do you want to cut in your budget? And so I think there's this issue, I think the fact that the subscriptions and all the money that goes to the papers has caused a lot of frustration. Having said that, I think let's not talk about the past, but let's see how we can proceed in the future. Of course, we want to have our papers published. In that sense, funders are not publishers, so it's not our role to take over Elsevier and Science and Nature and whatever. So let's see whether we can get together. We find it important that we can publish our papers. We are willing to pay for it based on a transparent business model and see whether we can find an agreement how to achieve that goal.
Thank you very much, because of course it's very easy to say, okay, the way it works right now is not a workable situation, but we all then need to come up with solutions.
Sure.
So have you thought about new business models that would be workable, or are you saying I'll leave that up to the private sector themselves?
Well, I don't want to leave it up to the private sector. I think let's talk. Well, is there a specific business model I have in mind? Well, in Plan S talks about the golden mode. Well, I think that's kind of too strict in my view. I think also green is a possibility, but with some constraints in order to make sure that the papers will become accessible to the whole scientific community without any delays. And that can be done, maybe that can be done in different ways. And as I just mentioned, I think everyone realizes that we have to pay for the service. I mean, there's nothing for free. And if there's a bold statement in Plan S saying that if publishers will not change the business model, the coalition will set up new journals. That means we have to provide money in order to achieve that. So this is not a solution. It's the worst case scenario I have in mind.
Thank you. And also good to come back to these kind of routes. You're saying gold route is a good route, green route is a good route. Perhaps we need some hybrid model.
Yeah, but be careful. I've noticed that different countries have a different interpretation about green. So we have to be very specific. I think it would be too much technical details to go in that issue over here.
Yeah.
But on the global, let's say to be short, green would be fine if it means that the paper is publicly available for the scientific community without any delay. So the archives, like in physics and chemistry, they serve an excellent goal. I mean, nothing wrong with that. That's green.
And otherwise we'll opt for orange open access.
For example.
Right? Exactly. We have a solution already, ladies and gentlemen. Good. Karel, can you contribute to this question about what are the barriers to open access?
In my view, the largest barrier is history. The fact that we have the model we have. It's understandable that we have publishers, they do their best, the system has grown, they have shareholders, they have tried to optimize the system, which I cannot say that
But
is
you
stupid.
can't change history.
Correct. So we have to build a new future. That's what we have to do. Yeah? But the barrier to open science so far has been the history and people sticking to the history too much. And there the publishers have a part of the deal. When Nick uses the word open access for his journals, I'm sure he includes the hybrid journals. I don't. And then we already have an interesting discussion. And as Stan was saying, this is maybe not a meeting to go into the details, but the technical details are extremely important in this whole discussion. We cannot just sit here and use the word open access as if we're all saying the same thing. We are not. We're all saying something quite different. It's very simple. If the profit of the publishers would be reduced to, let's say, 20% of the present profit, we would have more money available to simply go into an open system. And yes, the publishers deserve money because they do work. Whether they deserve so much money and whether their shareholders should stick so long with the old model is questionable. Green, for me, is not by definition, as Stan already said, the way to go in every case. Gold, neither. Huh? So it's a complex situation. And the aim, we have to keep the aim in mind. The aim is not to have a new business model. The aim is not to save the publishers. The aim is not to save the funders. The aim is to get the research results out there, where people can easily find them, where people can easily access them, where people can easily reuse them. That is the aim. And that
The fair
is
principle.
exactly, as with the data, the fair principle. So we should keep that aim in mind and not talk about business models and other things if we lose that aim out of sight.
Thank you for this comment. Barbara, I think you would be willing to publish open access, but what if the financial consequences would be harmful? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I can definitely elaborate on that. It also kind of goes back to what Nick just said about scientists having the responsibility to also wanting to publish open access, and that some scientists don't do that for all of their papers. But for us, I don't think any scientist is against publishing open access. But I can't just choose a journal where I want to publish. It has to go through peer review. Oftentimes it will get rejected a couple times. I have to do revisions. And there's only so many journals that will take my work or that are a very good fit for my work. So if I end up publishing in a non-open access journal, or I publish a paper that's not open access in a potentially open access journal, it's not because I don't want to, it's because I don't have any other opportunity to do so. And I recently published a paper. I had the opportunity to make it open access, but I didn't have the funds. Like there wasn't any funds in my own funding. I had a Rubicon from NWO. My lab didn't have the funding, and the university didn't have the funding. So unless I paid for it out of pocket, that wasn't going to happen. So yeah, this paper now isn't open access, and it's not because I didn't want to publish it open access.
So also for you, you can't just say, hey, I'll just do open access, because it's not as easy as it sounds. Karel, you would like to complement the comment of Barbara?
Yeah, because the problem here is the fact that the researcher has to pay. And which clearly stated in Plan S, sorry, not in Stam S.
That's the follow-up.
Yeah, I understand. Now I understand where the S comes from. It's not from strong, super, or whatever. Smiths could also be. But that's the aim in Plan S, that not the researcher has to pay. And in my suggestion to reduce the profit of the publishers and make the whole thing cheaper, theoretically it is easy. And I'm sure for the Delft University of Technology it's very simple. We have now a budget for the journals. If we use that budget for the APCs, and if we could reduce it, that would be fine. No problem whatsoever. But not every university works the same way. They do not all distribute their money in the same way. Not every country works the same way. Some countries have more money than other countries. So it's a complex situation. But those universities that can control their financial model internally can easily make the switch. If they now buy journals, they could pay also APCs.
But these are just probably a few top-notch universities.
No. I think from the funders in the Coalition S, this is probably 90%. But that doesn't mean that the universities have their business in order. That's another story.
But
thank you. Yeah.
If I add to that, so we made explicit in Plan S that the researchers shouldn't pay for it, which doesn't automatically mean that the funders should pay for it. I think the problem is we don't want, on top of the subscriptions, an additional amount of money that we have to spend to get everything open access. And so there is definitely a financial issue over here. But there are good, excellent open access journals who have very decent rates to make papers open access available for reasonable prices. And well, if I make a comparison with many other journals where you have to make a subscription fee, and on top of that an additional amount of money, APCs, which on average are way higher than the APCs for the open access journals, I think there's room for discussion.
Okay, well that's why we have the discussion, Karel, and then
one more comment.
to Nick.
Theoretically again, if every journal would be open access, then Barbara could choose any journal she wanted to, and we would have the same ranks in the journals, very good ones and poor ones.
So it would be great to make that happen, indeed. Nick?
Yeah, so now we're getting to the meat of it, right?
Yes. We were warming up, we're finally getting it.
So I see. So I think absolutely, we can, if every funder provided the money for open access, then problem would be solved. And I think, as you're saying, probably the total amount paid to the system would be less. So I think we can all see that end state. And there's no dispute about that. And again, there's nothing from Elsevier's perspective preventing that end state from happening literally today. Every funder could miraculously agree today, then all of our journals offer that option. There would be no subscription articles anymore. The inconvenient truth is 85% of the world's articles are published under the subscription model. So even if you do make every article from your university available gold open access, and every article from the Netherlands gold open access, between the two of you, you've made 2% of the world's articles gold open access. There's still 98% of the world out there. And as I said earlier, you have the NIH, 5% of the world's research, so 2.5 times the size of the Netherlands, NSF, twice the size of the Netherlands, DOE, 1.5 times the size of the Netherlands, DOD, all choosing green open access, which is a derivative of the subscription model. I agree with you. History is the challenge here, right? But effectively, there's two ways of paying for articles. And I want to come back to a point you made about hybrid. I don't think journals are the relevant unit here. I think it's articles. Open access happens article by article. And in hybrid journals, you have gold open access articles and you have subscription articles. Gold open access is paid for by one payer. Subscription articles are paid for by thousands of payers, right? The cost is split among both. So actually, the issue is, if you use all your money to make your portion gold open access and you, as I say, buy the world a drink, it's not the publisher's fault if China and the US don't return the favor and buy a drink back. They still rely on you to pay your portion of subscription-based articles. So that's actually the crux of the matter. How do you not get penalized for being a first mover? How do you set an example that others then follow so that you as quickly as possible get to that end state of everything being gold open access? And coming back to the point of view of blame, we would say it's probably not fair to blame publishers for not just instantly affecting that switch, because it's not our role to go and tell NIH that they shouldn't have green open access and they should publish gold. Same, it's not the same to do that with NSFC in China. They decide how they want to publish their output. We are here to serve the needs of a global community, and as best as possible, we're trying to balance local demands with what we see in a global dynamic.
Okay, thank you. So the problems are really, really very deeply rooted in the broader OA system.
Well, of course, you shouldn't. There's no need for you to talk to NIH. We will do that. And so there may be a situation.
Have you? Sorry, I was going to say. What did they say when you do?
Well, we are talking to NIH, and I think it's not this a proper place to reproduce what we are saying. But the point I want to make is that obviously, if the Netherlands will be the only country where we will introduce open access, it will be absolute failure. But so our aim is, let's say, to convince the scientific world, and that is more than the Netherlands, also more than Europe, to change, to achieve the goal to get everything open access and to discuss what's the best way. And so we are talking to many players. Asia is a difficult player for various reasons, but our aim is not to restrict it to Europe, but even to expand it worldwide.
Of course, open access doesn't stop at the European borders, that's clear, because science is very international and global. Karel?
Your numbers are right, huh? We're small, and the Netherlands is small, the funders are still small compared to the rest of the world. Elsevier is not so small, so why didn't you move 15 years ago? Why didn't you pull all the plugs and went for open access as quick as possible and as strong as possible and use all your power to do whatever is possible? You could not switch, not in one day. But why did you wait for the rest of the world?
You're taking over my moderation role. Thank you, Karel.
Why are you waiting for the rest of the world?
Well, first of all, as I said at the outset, I've acknowledged that we were conservative. We were slow to this party, no doubt about it. Have you ever done anything you regret? Yeah. I have.
Seldom.
I have. However, it's important to get in perspective what can actually Elsevier do, because I think there's a sense that Elsevier can somehow single-handedly move the world. We're 17%, 1/7 of the world's articles. So take the Netherlands, 17% of 2% is a number less than 1%. So even working together, it actually affects a very small volume of the 2.5 million articles that are published each year. We are basically having the principle that we want a sustainable transition, right? So if everyone chooses overnight to publish gold open access, but they need to be persuaded. The NIH needs to be persuaded. And we, as you said, it's not our role to persuade them. But if they chose to, the option's there. It's there right now. It's been there for the last 5 years. So that's where we would say it's actually other stakeholders in the community that need to choose it and decide that that's the global outcome that they want.
So you're saying it's a true global movement.
If open access happen globally, global stakeholders have to work together.
Okay, so Karel, you're involved with some global players as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Could you elaborate on that
Yeah,
shortly? Because the Stan, you already mentioned Asia, very difficult, but perhaps you see a different view.
The global community we'll have a meeting with tomorrow, by the way, in Luyben, is on the data part, not on the open access part. But there we try to move immediately from the scientists together with the ministries to a global community, global open fair, in order to see that for the data we don't make the same. We don't create the same history as we have created, all of us. I'm not blaming anybody. We have done that as well. And that's why we sit here today. I have a question to Nick, if I may. I'm not a moderator, but
Yes,
I do not see the conflict between anybody using green open access with the work you do.
Is that a question?
That's a question.
So I think
Is there a
Well,
conflict?
Is there a conflict?
so. There's no issue with green open access. As I said at the outset, we enable green open access for all of our articles.
Why
I think
wait for NIH?
we don't. We deposit all NIH manuscripts
talk
to
to them?
PubMed
Why
Central
talk to them? Let them do green.
because it gets down to the fact that that means if you have green open access, you have subscription journals. Depending on, and that's what I agree with you. We actually have to go into the definition of green. If you're talking preprints, which is the not yet peer-reviewed, not yet submitted to a journal, Elsevier's never had an issue with posting preprints immediately. In fact, we operate a very large preprint server, SSRN, in the social sciences and humanities, and we're branching that out into other disciplines. So there's no issue whatsoever with posting your article online immediately. If you want the peer-reviewed preprint, then that has been through the peer review process. It's been through value-adding processes such as editing, so through linking. That you need to be able to recoup the cost to make the difference between an unpeer-reviewed preprint and a peer-reviewed accepted manuscript that also has the credibility of the journal that accepted it on it, because you know that this is something that's unpublished versus something that's going to be published or was published. So there you do need to have an embargo period, because otherwise, why would anyone pay subscriptions for anything that's freely available immediately? So you can have the preprint, but that's where the issue comes in. If you have embargo periods, you have subscriptions. If you have subscriptions, you have subscription-based articles. So therefore, I think the way to achieve what you're seeking to achieve, which is immediate open access in final form, not the preprint version, not the accepted version, not embargoes, you are actually talking about gold open access, and that does require a change in the position of the NIH policy.
Okay, thank you for that, Stan. Yeah.
It would be fine for me if it would be the accepted version.
Exactly.
That's the
Yeah.
point. I don't
Yeah.
need the final layout or whatever. It's just the accepted version. That should become available without any time delay.
Yeah, but there's a different
Sure,
view
but, I
here.
mean, that's exactly why
Yeah.
I mentioned the
Yeah.
business model.
Yeah.
I realize that if we make this possible, then why should I take a subscription to journals anymore? So there definitely is an issue.
Okay, thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't just want to do all the talking, introducing the questions. I'd like to engage you as well. Is there a question from your side for the whole panel or one of the panelists? Yes, and I'll come to you. If you could please state your name and affiliation.
Kastelein, researcher, editor, co-editor, editorial board. I've seen science from different ways, and I think there are basically two questions I want to ask. One is, I'm a bit surprised that you have to, if you want to have an article from a long time ago, you have to pay tremendously, $50 per article, and I never understood because that was already in the system. It was, I'm talking about accepted, peer-reviewed journals. So why is that? And there's a wide variety between the publishers.
That's a question for Nick?
Yes,
Yes.
or for
Yeah.
whoever would like
Yeah.
to answer. And the other is open access or new initiatives like ResearchGate who want to let people upload your article. What the opinion is about that, and what if that is a help in getting open access or just the opposite.
Thank you. If you can, before you answer, repeat the question shortly for the filming, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. I think the first one is, why are the fees to access individual articles that can be several years old as they are, and very often the number that's quoted is around 30 euros. I think the answer is, get back to history. It is a historical legacy. At the same time, it's one that is designed, our pricing models for subscription content, and this does apply to subscription content, incentivize basically having access to all you can eat, right? So if you are so actually we would prefer that institutions subscribe to the whole journals or that subscribe to collections of journals, because we believe there's the greatest value there. And so that's why we've structured business models accordingly. And I think the individual article model being as it is to encourage broad adoption rather than very, very niche adoption. But it is something that we are constantly looking at, and we have tried additional models. So, for example, rental service models where you can rent for 24 hours for sometimes 99 pence or cents, or 3.99 for a longer period. So absolutely, that's an area that requires innovation. At the end of the day, though, that counts for a very small portion of usage, individual access. The vast majority happens within the scientific community, but it is an important consideration.
Thank
The
you.
second question.
Does anyone else want to comment on the first question?
ResearchGate. Someone, I think. Yeah.
Does anyone want to comment on the first question? Okay. Yeah.
And the second question is about, I think, sharing platforms in general. So there's ResearchGate. We operate Mendeley. Our position there is we fully support sharing of articles. We recognise that researchers collaborate. Research is increasingly interdisciplinary. It's international, as we've established. It's data intensive. So researchers need to be able to share information to generate new information. So we want to facilitate that. The fundamental premise of everything that supports our position is we want it to be done in a way that's viable, that's sustainable. So just as I struggle to see how it's viable to incur all the costs associated with making the difference between unpublished and published, and then making a manuscript version of the published version available, because you've incurred the costs and now you've undermined your ability to recoup them. Similarly, with platforms like ResearchGate, we'd be fine if they were sharing in a way that we consider to be viable. So if an article is open access, for example, or if a reader is already entitled to read that article because their institution has paid for it, then absolutely that would be fine, and that's how Mendeley operates, and other what we would consider compliant platforms. What's not fine is when those articles are just aggregated, very often without the authors knowing that they've been aggregated, and made available globally for no charge, when in fact a mechanism exists to check whether that article should be uploaded in the first place, and we have made such a mechanism exist so that things can be checked before they get uploaded. So that's a general principle. Sharing's good. Sharing needs to be viable, because if it's not viable, there won't be anything to share. So right now, the assumption is that, ResearchGate, it'll just keep operating while Elsevier doesn't. There won't be any articles on ResearchGate if Elsevier doesn't operate. So that's why platforms need to be viable.
Okay, thank you. Karel, you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, I want to elaborate a little bit on that, and again raise the question to Nick, why not put everything which is X months old open? You just said it's peanuts, hardly anybody looks at it, it's very small, so that would be a show of good faith. Secondly, why do you sell bundles? Why do we have to buy all those journals we do not even want? Yes, I understand you optimize that system over the world, so maybe someone else wants these bundles, but I would call it in Dutch koppelverkoop, and that is legally not viable.
So you're basically pleading for openly sharing immediately?
No, I said if hardly anybody looks at the old articles,
yeah.
why not put everything open tomorrow, because they can do that, which is older than 6 months.
Okay, thank you.
I'm working hard today, right?
Yeah, you're working very hard.
For a host.
That's why we came here.
I guess hosts have to work hard, don't they? I've learned from you, Karel, so I'm going to pose the question right back to you. All of our journals allow articles to be posted, manuscripts to be posted after an embargo period. Why don't you post them? So that's my answer to the first one. We've enabled it, so researchers could absolutely do that. Of course, some journals do that automatically, and increasingly we're seeing the movement in that direction. In terms of bundles or all-you-can-eat packages, to me it's very interesting that we would call them collections. So the Freedom Collection, essentially in the old historical model, universities subscribed to a subset of journals. So let's say 500 journals of the 2,000 that we published. It was actually seen as a very welcome innovation that in return for continuing to subscribe to the initial 500, access to the other 1,500 was provided at a very minimal, some less than 2% incremental fee. So that at the time was heralded as a big innovation. We used to have to pay a la carte, now we get all you can eat. Over time, that was seen as locking in universities, hence your point about every 3 years we come around. Well, the issue there is not so much, we would say, that the price increases, because the volume of the price increases has historically been less than the volume of articles in those 2,000 journals, so the price per article has come down. The issue is the amount of money available to pay hasn't kept pace with the amount of funding for new research. So in other words, more research is being generated than there is money to pay for it. So the second thing is hybrid journals. Similarly, they were applauded. Remember how everyone said Springer's a leader in open access because they've made all their journals hybrid. Now hybrids are bad, and Karel doesn't even count them as open access. That's happened in the space of about 8 years. So again, that's why I say we have to look at the individual articles. Hybrids aren't bad. They're just umbrella titles that have gold open access articles and subscription articles. And where I think we've fallen down as an industry is in failing to explain that the subscription payments are for only the subscription portions of those journals. And that actually, just because gold open access is increasing doesn't mean the volume of subscription journals are also increasing.
So that's about
You've got
communication.
growth in both. Why? Because funders keep funding more research. So you have $500 billion of research money being spent that's growing 4% per year, going to 7 million researchers who have lots of ideas that need to be reviewed.
Which is a great development, right? I mean,
It
there's
is
so
great
many
development,
challenges to
but that's where
solve.
you get growth in both gold open
Yeah.
access and subscriptions.
Okay, before you comment, Nick, this is your opportunity to ask a
Again.
question back.
Well, he just asked the question.
I'm just going to ask you another one.
And my answer would be very simple. With respect to the bundles first, and then I'll come back to the putting it open immediately. With respect to the bundles, you could have easily made another business model. So any journal you would like to add, you give a reduction on the price of the next step, rather than create bundles where initially it sounds good to have 500 extra journals for 2% price increase, but in the end you've seen it doesn't work, and nobody's really happy with it. With respect to the other issue, let me get back, help me.
Sharing platforms.
No, everybody can put it on their own platform anyway. Why don't they do that, and why do they complain? It makes a difference whether you have everything on your servers, and we pay already a lot of money for everything you do, so why don't you keep it on your servers and have access to it? It makes quite a difference whether a researcher has to start finding all the resources in the different universities, or simply goes to Elsevier in this case and logs into the journal. So it makes a difference whether you put it open, green, everything that's 6 months old, or whether the individual puts it open. That's the answer to your first question.
So, and that's a change of business model for sure.
Yeah,
Stan.
and about hybrids.
Yeah.
So yes, it was applauded quite some time ago because we thought it was a transition model. But now we see that we're going to stick to that kind of model, and in a way that we simply cannot afford because, well, as I've explained that before. So hybrid was a good, everyone thought it was a way to go to open access, but we noticed that we are going to stuck in a situation. On November 1 there will be a meeting organized by the Royal Academy on open access, and I will show data that clearly demonstrate that in the past 2 years almost nothing has happened regarding the number of publications open access. In the Netherlands we are doing reasonably well. We have something like, if I'm correct, 48% of the papers that are at least funded by NWO are open access, but within Europe it's only 20%, and it's just stable. So this indicates that what we thought maybe we were wrong, maybe we were naive by thinking that the hybrid model would be a transition to full open access. Now the situation is it's not, and that's why we want to change it.
Okay, and then the big question comes back, how can you change that? And I'd like to come back to Barbara for that as well. I mean, change has to do with making change on many different levels, and of course still policymakers, ministries have a big role to play. So what would your advice be to policymakers, but perhaps also to your colleagues sitting here? How do you see things moving forward?
That's a pretty big question.
It is.
I mean, like I expressed before, I think scientists are very much in favor of open access, but I think, which is also why I'm very happy to be here and that you guys are interested in the voice of researchers, it's very easy to think of policies that will get researchers at the short end, basically. So if I am forced to publish open access, but I can't, that makes it very difficult for me. And if I have to publish open access, and that means I can't use the outlets that I want, but I'm forced to publish into open access journals that might be either of interest to a different part of the readership or have a lower impact factor, which I know it's not the...
Ladies and gentlemen, a big applause to Karel.
It was not my phone ringing, it was my watch ringing. My phone is switched off.
Okay. It's your watch. I didn't mention watch. You're so lovely.
So you have to be exact. Hybrid. Correct.
Sorry for the interruption.
You should be buying everyone a drink.
No, if I'm forced to publish in a journal that's open access but has a lower impact factor, which I know is kind of controversial, but it is how I am judged. So in 2 or 3 years, I have to write my next proposal. If we are still judging scientists based on number of publications and impact factor in which journals they are published, and I can't freely choose my outlets, that will hinder me in my work. So my advice would be, please keep talking to researchers and identify these type of difficulties for the community. Because it's already difficult for us to do our work and to get
So
funding.
do you do these things on a regular basis?
I mean, sometimes I'm like part of a panel, I do a lot of outreach, things like that. I would love to be involved in more than just doing research, which for me has also been one of the primary reasons why I didn't stay in the US but came back to the Netherlands, to be involved in these type of discussions.
Because in the end, all the actors need to keep an eye on the researchers themselves, because that's what it's about, of course. We need to ensure that you have the opportunity to publish open access in the best way possible. Okay, thank you. Perhaps touch upon another topic related to that, and then I'll take your question. Thank you. That also has to do, we blame history a lot. We can't change that, but we can start at a new point where we all work together. And my question to you is, what is the importance of education, training, skills on all levels? Because also within this broader discussion, there seems to be no agreement on some kind of definitions. You already said we should revise some definitions. How important is this common agreed knowledge base? Let's call it standards for open access. Barbara, if you would like to start.
I mean, I do think that we're moving toward a different type of field in science, and that the rules are changing. So I think it's important for us to think about new PhD students and train them in open access, but also how to connect with society, how to make your data available, how to make your scripts available, all these type of things. And yes, that will take a lot of education. I also think it's important that we acknowledge that. I'm already stretched pretty thin, so if I have to publish a lot in high open access impact, everything, and then also focus on open access education, all that kind of stuff, we should move towards a different system of acknowledging researchers for that.
Okay, thank you. Stan, is this something that is being echoed by you?
Well, I want to actually respond to what Barbara just said about how we evaluate whether you're a good scientist and based on what kind of criteria. You know, you mentioned the number of papers, impact factors. I think there's a strong evolution right now, at least within Europe, but I think also in other countries, that we should really change our system of evaluation scientists. I don't care where you publish your papers. Actually, well, the point is,
I'm sure Barbara does.
Sure, but
Of the system.
that's it because the system works that way.
Yeah.
I want to know what was your contribution to science, and so we should not count papers. We should not take the H index or whatever. So based on the developments in open access and based on new developments in open science, we need a new system for recognition of scientists, and that will come up not within a year, but I'm pretty sure that within 2-3 years we'll have a new system for evaluation of scientists, and I think that's absolutely necessary. If we are going to ask you to provide your data, if it's funded by NWO, and that means that you have to spend more time because you have to make sure that I can understand your data, I can use your data. So that means that I should also change my criteria for evaluating you because I put another requirement on you, and that should be part of my evaluation. So someone who has an excellent database, which is used by many other scientists, that's an excellent contribution to science. So my message is, yes, the developments in open access and open science will lead to a change in the way that we will evaluate and recognize scientists, and that will be there within 3 years.
And that's one of the hardest parts because a cultural shift
That's right.
to be able to make that happen.
Presumably it will take a generation, but at least within 3 years we will have a set of criteria after consultation of the scientists, of course, we are not to do it in ourselves, which will be applicable, I think, within Europe, will be used by all funding agencies in Europe, and also the Royal Academies, and just name them. And that will really have a real impact on science, because then you don't have to write 10 papers a year. I mean, 1 paper a year, which really has the main contribution of all your work. That's okay. And so that will have also a major impact on journals and the number of journals and the number of papers that you have to read.
Okay. And then the whole discussion on open access almost comes obsolete. Okay,
Well,
we
not
go.
obsolete.
Yeah.
I think we have a long transition period to go. I fully agree. We should get out of the rat race. That's very simple. And we already have a good document on recognition of scientists in the Netherlands. Has been discussed with many scientists in different fora. KNW has done an excellent job there, and we're doing the same thing in Europe. By the way, I think this whole discussion over open access is small compared to what we are going to see in the data area. So with respect to data, the whole thing is much more complex, especially if you do not only talk about the data as results in your publication. That's relatively easy, because once it's published, every author would like to have that out there. But if we talk about the data underlying there, you come into a whole different ballpark.
And
there we
let's
have
not touch upon that right now,
Yeah.
because we would need another 2 to 3 hours to discuss that
10
at
years,
least.
10 years.
Okay, thank you. There was a question from the audience.
Can I just comment on that one?
You can comment and I'll just walk over there already.
Sure. No, I just think there's a couple of strands here in discussion. One is about, you started with history and not able to change history, but how do we move forward together? And I just want to underscore, moving forward together is absolutely essential. We talked a little bit about blame earlier. It's just not helpful. I actually think shared facts, shared information, shared metrics help us have a common understanding and come to solutions. So I actually think the fact that funders are now stepping forward and saying we're willing to do what Wellcome Trust has done, and a portion, we basically have the position that research isn't done until it's published, and if you get our money we want it published open access. It's a very sensible, sustainable position, but it's actually a different thing than has been the case. So as more funders adopt that position, there will be proportionally fewer subscription articles, but not overnight. So I actually think the right discussion is publishers, funders, universities, to talk about how we have a shared model so that as funders' money to pay for gold open access comes into the system, then universities' money to fund subscription is still there in the short term, but becomes less over time. And it's a managed transition with clear metrics. The second strand of the discussion is metrics, and I absolutely agree. Metrics drive behavior. So it's absolutely, impact factor was set up in the 1950s, 60s as a proxy measure of journal quality. It wasn't set up to measure individuals. So I totally agree with you. Now we have much more data, and we want to drive different kinds of behavior, such as have you archived your data according to FAIR principles. So indeed, we are working ourselves also with, for example, on EU Science Monitor, Open Science Monitor, to make sure that with the community, we are agreeing metrics that drive desirable behaviors.
Okay.
So I think they're two important separate strands.
We have some agreement. That's great. Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to the moving on together and coming up with solutions. So Gareth O'Neill, President of the European Council of Doctoral Candidates and Junior Researchers, basically representing 29 national associations across Europe for early career researchers. We have issued about a month ago a statement with the Marie Curie Alumni Association and the Young Academy of Europe in support of Plan S with certain concerns regarding the 10 principles. And a direct question to Relix Reed Elsevier is, how do you see yourselves working with Coalition S members and the research community on 4 key issues in that plan? Number 1, the definition of green as no embargoes, copyright retention to authors, and a final, whatever that is, version. Number 2, the capping of article processing charges. Number 3, the boycotting of funding for hybrid venues. And number 4, the dissolution of the journal impact factor to evaluate researchers, careers and grants.
So if I did justice to all 4 of those, then we'd basically be having the drinks that you're going to buy. So I'll try and keep it brief. I think I've talked about the importance of definition of green, and preprints. I've made our position clear. We've never had an issue with making preprints available. We have no claim to them. We haven't invested anything to improve them. When it comes to what we call accepted author manuscripts, something that's been accepted by a journal and therefore gets the credibility associated with that journal and conferred upon it, we do think there needs to be embargo period. So there suggests some resolution to be had. I think your second question was about APC.
Retention also on green.
Okay. So I guess we have a view in copyright retention. If a author is to retain rights, then essentially they're not transferring it to a publisher in order to be able to recoup via subscription. So we would consider that gold, essentially, or potentially CC BY with a non-commercial license after an embargo period. But again, there's some resolution to be had there, so I don't have an answer. It needs further discussion. APCs was the second one. I think APC caps are, nobody really knows, including the funders that signed Plan Smits, Sweeney, Schultz, Science Europe, or Plan S, what actually caps mean. They're just thinking, just because we've made money available doesn't mean you can go wild and charge us what you like. I would say there's no industry, no service ever provided where everything is charged the same price. So I would say with no relation to quality. So somehow that gets us to metrics again. There need to be measurable measures of quality and service levels. And I think the basic principle is you should get what you pay for. And if researchers want to publish in an output, but the funder will cap it at a certain amount, then there needs to be mechanisms that funders can top up themselves, I would say. But
Just to add, sorry, they said specifically it's a temporary cap to stabilise the market.
Fair enough. So that again needs further requirements. And we provide a service. If funders choose they're only going to fund up to a certain amount of that service, then it's really between the funder and the researcher. Right? Plan S is about a contract, or will be contract, between funders and researchers. We're here to service those researchers, and of course we aim to do so in a way that researchers aren't put in a conflict between the funders and us. We've done that with NIH, with OSTP agencies, with Wellcome, with Gates, with 50 other funding bodies. So we've managed it before, we expect to manage it again. Your third one was about exclusion, was it? It was...
Boycotting.
Pardon?
Boycotting, right?
Hybrid. I think I've already talked about that. I actually think hybrid's a red herring. I don't understand, frankly. If you read the Plan S principles, it said, I think it's point number 9, hybrid journals are not consistent with these 8 principles. I really struggle to see in what way they're not. Hybrid journals are collections of gold open access articles and subscription articles. To me, whether those gold open access articles are under a hybrid umbrella or a pure gold umbrella is irrelevant. What we need to show is if hybrid journal subscription prices go up, it's because the volume of subscription articles published in that hybrid journal has also gone up. What would be wrong is if the volume of subscription articles comes down and the price goes up. That would just be plain wrong. So I think actually we need more transparency to work with funders to explain. I think we should do away with the term hybrid journals. We should just talk about articles. Are they gold open access or are they subscription? And your fourth question?
Well, it was also tied back to double dipping, I think, regarding
Yeah.
hybrid publishing.
Exactly, so we need to show it's not double dipping, and this is, so the intuitive thing is if gold open access has gone from 0 to 15 and subscription's gone from 100 to 85, therefore subscription has gone down. It hasn't. Those ratios have changed while there's been an increased volume in both. So it's 85% of a much bigger number than what was previously 100% of. And the last question?
Was journal impact factor, the use of publishers, number one, to increase revenue for articles, journals, but then number two, that careers are being judged on this by institutions as well.
So I think again, I've said about journal impact factors, they were there really as a proxy measure of quality for a collection of articles under a journal. We basically have the view that metrics need to be fit for purpose, and measures of journal quality should, no matter whether they're good or bad, should not be used as measures of researcher quality. So essentially we need a new system of metrics, as has already been said.
Okay, thank you. Karel, you wanted to elaborate on one of the points? You're fine? Okay. Given the time constraints, we'll take one more question from the audience, and I think we do have a question.
Thank you. My name is Bas Blauboer. I'm an editor of the journal and a researcher in the past. I'm retired now. But my question regards to the remarks that were made on the preprint. I think that's not a good thing, because we are all for quality, and the preprint is not gone to the full process of editing and reviewing. So why put that on the web? There is so much rubbish already in the published data that are we have the reproducibility crisis. Let's not add to that. What's your remark on that?
That's why I mentioned that I want to have the final accepted version available. I don't care about all the previous versions. That's the issue.
Okay. Anyone else who would like to comment on that? Okay. That's your answer, sir. Are you happy?
I'm very happy.
Okay, very happy. Very good.
It depends on which area you're working in. You have genetics, and in genetics, it's very important to have it already out before others can replicate it. So I think you can't generalize that.
Okay. Well, given the time.
Sorry?
You can have both.
Yeah, you can have both.
But given the time constraint, you can take that debate further during the refreshments, if that's okay, because we've almost come to the end. I think I just have a final question for all of you, and that is, how do you see the debate on open access moving forward? And I would say within the coming 5 years. If you can keep it into 2 sentences, that would be remarkable.
Okay, well, I look forward to a further conversation with the publishers to see how we can achieve our common goals. And the second thing is, if that requires a transition period, I think we are happy to take the transition period to achieve the goal.
Very good. Thank you for your open attitude.
On top of that, I would suggest, and that I did to the board of Elsevier in Brussels a couple of months ago, make a bold step and lead the pack rather than wait till the others have done something.
Okay. Barbara?
Well, I don't know how it's going to go, but I could express a wish, is to keep the researchers in mind and not force the rules upon them.
Okay, thank you. And then Nick?
So I think, in essence, we'll have gone from having talked about whether open access is a good thing to where we are now, which is agreeing it's a good thing, but not quite sure how to get from history to the future we want to get to having got to that future. And for that to happen, more of this needs to happen. So there's never any agreement reached without talking to each other. So let's keep talking to each other.
Exactly. So we're not there yet that we have everything harmonized, but by taking baby steps, we'll get there in
Bigger
the
than
end.
baby
Yeah,
steps.
yeah.
We've
Hopefully
been
that will
taking
work
baby
out.
Bold moves, I said.
Bold moves. 2 words. Bold moves. Ladies and gentlemen, a big hand to our panelists.